Captain Logan, and today I'm sitting and talking with Kevin J. Anderson. Thanks for being with me. So excited to get to talk to you because today we get to chat about one of my very, very, very favorite books of all time. And I say...
This is a better cover.
And I say, it's a better cover, but I got the hardback. See, I could just take...
You've got the book club edition there.
That's true. I could just take this off and then be like, that's it, yeah. This is, when I say one of my favorite books, I mean one of my favorite books, like not just things based on comics, things based on comic characters. I loved this. You took the origin of Superman, or at least the origin of his parents, right, and the destruction of the planet, and you made it You
gave it a spoiler. The planet's destroyed. Don't ruin that for everybody.
Sorry, everybody. He does destroy Krypton. Okay. I won't tell you how, though, because that's one of the coolest things about the book, is how you destroy it. And anyway, but one of the things I love about this book is that it is bona fide science fiction. I mean, like, it's a legitimate science fiction novel. The first thing I want to ask you about it is, and by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, 0405, when the book came out?
Well, we have a copyright page.
we can find out.
Right, live on camera.
I thought you might know.
Live on camera. We can look at it as 2007. This man does not win the prize.
Yeah, well, anyway.
All right.
I argued with somebody about it earlier, and he said 04, and I said later than that. But anyway, so the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what were your influences for the prose and the science fiction of it outside of Superman and comics and stuff, because it reads like it's influenced by a lot of classic science fiction.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm known for.
Yeah.
I've written a whole bunch of Dune novels. I've got my entire very large series called The Saga of Seven Suns. It's like Game of Thrones with planets. And I've written a lot of Star Wars books, so I'm a science fiction writer. I write science fiction novels. I'm also a comics fan. So I grew up like absorbing all of the background in Superman. So I knew all the stories. I knew all about Argo City and Kara and the Phantom Zone.
The Bottle City of Kandor.
I mean, I knew all of that stuff. And it just so happened that Paul Levitz, who was the vice president of DC Comics at the time, he was a big fan of my Dune novels. So I'll show up that one. This is the newest one that came out, Phantasm Dune. I've written a dozen or more Dune novels with Frank Herbert's son. And I knew Paul, so I would always send Paul a signed copy of the new Dune book when it came out. Because he sends me free comics and I send him free Dune books, so it's a workable relationship. And one day I had because I knew about all the stuff about Jor-El and General Zod and Argo City, Zor-El, the Phantom Zone, all of these things. And I thought, why don't we write The Last Days of Krypton like The Last Days of Pompeii? A big epic story like that, and write a genuine science fiction novel about how the planet Krypton is destroyed. Because everybody knows, oh, Jor-El, the smartest guy on the planet, says the world's going to end, and the planet blows up and a baby flies away. That's the entire story they know. Well, what if you make this into a full-on science fiction epic? So I called up Paul Levitz, and Paul Levitz takes my call because he thinks I want to talk to him about some Dune book that I've just come out with. And I said, Paul, I want to write a book for you. And he said, oh, what's that? I said, I want to do The Last Days of Krypton as a real big science fiction book. And I wanted to do this and answer all the continuity things and put them all together. And there was like silence on the phone and said, that's the coolest idea I've ever heard. So from on high, Vice President of DC Comics, he said, make this book happen. So I was able to come in on the back door and do things quite well. And then what I wanted to do, again, as a science fiction person.
Yeah.
I'm also a comic person, but I wanted to look at this as a science fiction person, which means I wanted to make it rigorously make sense.
Yeah. How does all the stuff work?
And I say this as a Superman fan. There's a whole bunch of stuff in Superman canon that makes no sense at all.
Absolutely.
But that was my job, is to make it make sense. So, for instance, why does, when the smartest guy in the entire planet, or the smartest guy in the entire planet says there's a bunch of trouble coming, nobody believes it? But even worse, when the planet's blowing up, why is it that they only had one spaceship on the entire planet?
Yeah.
And even worse, Who builds a spaceship that's baby-sized? Why on earth would you build one spaceship and have it only big enough for a baby in it?
And there have been some bizarre excuses.
So I had to come up with, why does Krypton, the most advanced planet, according to some write-ups, the most advanced planet in 15 known galaxies or something like that, how can they not have spaceships? So I had to work backwards from that. So how do you build a culture that is so advanced, but for some reason they don't have spaceships? Well, then I was thinking of Japan in the 1840s or so, when they completely cut themselves off from the world. Japan, in the last days of the samurai, had no contact with the outside world. They banned trade. Nobody could come to the country. They blocked themselves off because they didn't want to be contaminated by outsiders. So what if Krypton did that? They banned all spaceships.
Totally isolationist.
So all space travel was banned.
Yeah.
So if you're a smart guy like Jor-El and you can't do space travel, what do? Well, I'm going to play with dimensional travel instead. So he's in the chapter 1, so I'm not blowing too much.
He finds a loophole.
He finds a loophole. He's going, how about dimensional travel? And he discovers the Phantom Zone. Okay, that all fits together with the whole Krypton thing.
Sure.
And then we've got the whole General Zod story. You've got Argo City. You've got Zor-El. And the other thing I was thinking about was, so General Zod takes over and he conquers the planet. Well, how does that get set up? Then I started thinking, wait a second, Brainiac comes and steals the city of Kandor, shrinks it down and goes away with it. Think of what that would do to an advanced planet, that some outside alien shows up, takes Washington, D.C., and just runs away with it. The whole world would be in this gigantic turmoil, which would open up for somebody like General Zod to come in and impose his own rule. All of these dominoes fell into place, and all of this felt like, hey, this makes sense now. This all works. Everything comes together. This is exactly the way it's supposed to be. And so, and yes, at the end, the planet blows up and the baby gets away. But that is actually, you mentioned it earlier.
But there are a lot of surprises on the way there.
8 reasons for why the planet blows up, and it's almost like a Who Shot JR or Who Blew Up Krypton, because there's all kinds of different, as the book comes close to, the world's going to end, but there's like 7 different things that could kill it. There's a comet that's going to come in and impact it. There's structural things in the core that might blow up, and I won't tell you how it happens, but the baby does get away, don't worry, and a puppy.
That book did a couple things to me immediately, especially watching a lot of other things that tried to do Krypton after this. The first thing it did was it made me hate every other incarnation afterwards of the Phantom Zone.
Good.
Yeah.
You mean the Supergirl version of it in the movie was not quite the Phantom Zone?
Yeah, and that's kind of what they did with Smallville. And I don't know if you've seen that, but
I've seen every episode.
And there was some Smallville in your book.
Yes.
You definitely had looked at that. And I was surprised by how much of it you had looked at when I read your book. But I read everything. I don't think they had. The thing was, we were only in season 3 when you it was 3 or 4 or 5 when you wrote the book. So,
none of the General Zod stuff in Smallville had been out yet. Before
and I don't think any of the Phantom Zone stuff was, because that was 5.
Probably
not.
I mean, I was watching it regularly when I wrote it, but I don't remember at what point.
But yeah, the whole like barren wasteland thing is not nearly as interesting as what you did with it, because the idea of it's basically like just dropping Khan on that desolate planet, right? Like it's not nearly as interesting as this sightless, soundless void.
But remember in Superman 2, when they get put into that plane of glass and they're floating off, they're trapped in this twilight zone. Yeah. That's way more interesting than,
it is.
Oh, the environment is bad. I mean, I really think
what this made me wonder
weird dimensional thing is better.
Was in that movie, can they actually see out of it, or are we just seeing that? You know what I mean? Can they actually see what we're seeing outside of it? And your book says no. Your book says they're
trapped in a lightless
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't think I'm giving away too much to saying this, but the very first chapter, Jor-El gets stuck in it.
Yeah.
And there's so much really interesting like thematic implications of the notion of like a isolationist planet that's gotten away from science, and then suddenly this scientist with a lot of hubris comes in and says, let's just try stuff again. And it never comes down too much on either side, I don't think.
Well, and there's also a lot of like modern day implications of, like Jor-El keeps saying, if we keep doing this, like there's all kinds of stuff that's damaging our planet, and everybody says, we don't believe any of that stuff. So there's a lot of feedback into current attitudes towards science of my horoscope says not to believe that. So there's a lot of really interesting, relevant stuff to this book, but it's also comic fan nerd stuff.
It's just a lot of it's just a lot of fun. When you were first putting it together, how much of a research project was it? Like, how long were you taking notes and stuff before you finally put pen to paper?
Well, I mean, I went back and reread some of the basic. I watched all the old movies, and I reread the Byrne Man of Steel, which to me is kind of the seminal series that ties in with this. And I read some of the classic reprints of some of the other parts of Krypton, but the strange thing is I remembered all this stuff because I grew up with this stuff. I remembered Brainiac stealing the city. I remembered Zor-El being the smarter brother and the city of Argo. In fact, I really wanted to write another book after this, which was the Supergirl story, which was the Argo City floating through space, everybody dying, Kara. But the publisher didn't really want it because they said nobody knows much about the story of Supergirl. They went, that's the point. Let's do that. Who knows?
Now that show's about to happen, maybe someone will be interested in it now.
Well, we'll see. But that show, I believe, is based on the Krypton version that was in the Man of Steel movie, which is completely different from the version that's in my book.
I kind of wanted to talk to you about Man of Steel. Maybe we should do that now.
Sure.
I just wanted to know what you thought of that opening because, and you're right, it's very different. And yet, I think they read this book.
Well, that was in my mind.
They had to have.
Well, there's no stripping away the ego stuff here. When I went to see Man of Steel, I went, well, if you're doing this whole section on Krypton, we've got this book. And it's not like I made it up. This is a DC-approved, sanctioned book.
Yeah.
So, hello, damn it, read the book.
Yeah.
And then when I watched it, I went, you didn't read my book. I'm biased. I think my version was more tight and interesting and
less convoluted, certainly.
In fact, there were parts of it, but of course, there were parts in the beginning with the Superman DNA and all that stuff going together that tied back with the rest of the movie. So I guess that was feeding through. But either they didn't read my book or they willfully did their own thing, which movie people do. I mean, it's not. And again, this is DC Comics stuff. They own it. It's not mine, so it's not like I can be possessive about it. But mine really was pretty cool. So
no, it was, and of course, I think it's the definitive.
Right.
And
now they're doing the show called Krypton, which
is going to go two generations before your characters.
Okay. Well, I would love to have some input in that, but I think they're just going to do what they did.
I was going to ask you. I just feel like you're an authority on the subject, and even if they didn't do exactly what was there, you'd have some really good input. The reason I thought a lot about your book while I watched Man of Steel partially was just because what I thought immediately after I finished reading it was this story is more interesting than most Superman stories. Like, this book made me almost more of a fan of Krypton than I was of Superman, and then there's some really interesting character parallels too, and I think you did that on purpose with Zod and Jor-El being friends and then becoming enemies, and that being a very gradual kind of political thing.
It's very Luthor.
You were definitely looking at Luthor and Clark, and that's really interesting and really cool. There's a movie there, and I felt like I was watching the truncated third act of a Krypton movie when I walked into Man of Steel, and I really liked that part. It's not as good as yours, but at first, when I first saw it, and the more I've seen that movie, I've liked it less every time. But when I first saw it, I think I was just kind of excited because since I read your book, I always wanted a Krypton movie, and I almost kind of got my Krypton movie for a second.
Well, it looked like we were going to get it. And all the previews, it looked like we were going to get it. And so,
the nature versus nurture stuff is fascinating, but it would have been better if it was its own movie, I think.
Well, I don't think they had the stamina to do it. I mean, if they made Man of Steel as a trilogy instead of as a movie, they could have done the first movie in Krypton, and then they could have done the Superboy version, and they could have done the Superman.
Yeah, you do that 3-act thing that the original Superman movie did, but you make it a trilogy instead.
We're being recorded, so I better not talk about Man of Steel. So.
Yeah, well, I did want to ask you about that. So, would I be correct in assuming you don't care for that movie overall?
You would be correct in that.
Okay, all right.
I feel that they completely stripped out the tropes of Superman.
Yeah.
That there are things, as a writer, there are character tropes. And Superman is is the Boy Scout. He's the guy who wants to help people. He's the guy who wants to save the kitten from the tree. And this is a good thing. And he loves his parents, and he loves to help people. Batman, on the other hand, is the lost soul. He's the loner. He's fighting for justice almost despite himself, rather than because it's in his heart to do things for the right reason. In Man of Steel, they turned Clark Kent, Superman, into a lost soul. He was wandering around basically hiding and not wanting to help people, and he helps people under duress rather than because he's Superman and he wants to help people. And
he's waiting to have his destiny revealed to him instead of forging it.
And
right?
The whole Jonathan Kent dying of a heart attack is so poignant because this is the one thing that the Kryptonian with these powers can't help. And the scene with he rescued the puppy dog, but he didn't rescue his father from the, if I remember right, from the tornado, and it just went, this is just not. But that's what movies are doing now. The new version of Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, is not Spider-Man. It's a different. The whole origin's different. Everything's different, and it's so iconic for me because I grew up with these characters and these heroes.
Sure.
And Superman is as much like part of me from when I grew up that I know that character, and the character in the movie, which actually would have been a fine movie if it just didn't call itself Man of Steel, if it called itself, here's a new hero we're inventing. But it was bringing more stuff to Superman, and we'll see what their new movie of Batman versus Superman, since I wrote that book too.
And isn't that fascinating? The first thing they made it was a reimagining of a thing you reimagined, and then now kind of the same thing. So let's talk about Enemies and Allies. Did it come about the same way, where you pitched an idea, or did they come to you with that one?
Actually, this one, because they loved Last Days of Krypton so much, they said, so now what are they going to do next? And I went, well, how about a Batman and Superman one? And they said, great. But in my mind, I didn't just want to do a Batman and Superman team up. What is interesting about it? What's new? In fact, what they wanted me to do after Last Days of Krypton, they wanted me to do a sequel, as in Superboy, young Clark Kent growing up in Smallville and discovering his powers. And I said, but I've seen that 1,000 times before. What's new about that? Well, but it would be your take. Well, okay, but let's come up with something different. So I said, how about the first meeting of Batman and Superman, and we'll set it in the 50s, in the Cold War, and you've got Lex Luthor selling nuclear weapons to both the Soviets and the U.S., and just putting it in the 50s with Clark Kent basically being Richie Cunningham, and Bruce Wayne modeling himself after this new popular series of books by Ian Fleming about a guy called James Bond, and seeing Superman flying around and being Clark Kent and Batman, deciding, wow, look at the bullets bounce off that guy's chest. I have to invent a suit where bullets will bounce off my chest. And that guy can fly. How can he fly? I can't see any jetpacks behind him. So seeing what Superman can do,
arms race of its own,
well,
right?
Seeing what Superman can do makes Bruce Wayne, Batman, try to figure out how do I do that with my suit. So it was this really, really cool stuff because, of course, Bruce Wayne is rational. He can't believe that it's some flying alien that shoots laser beams out of his eyes. There's got to be some technological answer to it. So just the period piece aspect of it and getting into the characters of Batman and Superman, and I actually had an epiphany of understanding these characters when I was writing them, because getting into the character of Kal-El, Clark Kent, Superman, he really wants to be Clark Kent, normal, small-town boy.
Mm-hmm.
But Bruce Wayne really wants to be Batman. He doesn't want to be Bruce Wayne. And there's a scene where he's in the Batcave, and he's got this charity gala going on up in the mansion, and Alfred
Naturally. You've always got to have one of those.
Alfred comes down, and he's sitting, Bruce Wayne's sitting there in his Batman outfit without the cowl on,
mm-hmm.
and he's working on stuff. And Alfred says, the charity ball's going, you have to get up there, Master Bruce, you have to put your tux on. And he's sitting there in his Batman uniform, and he says, now I have to go put my costume on. And that was just this thing for me where I realized that Bruce Wayne thinks the Bruce Wayne version is the fake persona,
right.
whereas Kal-El thinks the Superman is the fake persona, and he really wants to be Clark Kent.
Reminds me of that line in Batman Beyond, in my head, that's not what I call myself.
So see, I'm like a fan. I can really get passionate and talk about this for a long time.
Have you ever read Justice League New Frontier?
No.
Because the way your style and the way you
reminds
me a little bit of that. Yes.
Maybe I did read a long time when I was working on this. It's been out for a while, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in the 50s-ish, right?
Yeah. Huh?
Yeah.
It was set in the 50s.
Set in the 50s.
I want to say that was a Dwayne McDuffie thing. I don't remember, but but there was an animated movie based on it. It was the second one that the DC Direct Animated Videos did.
I would have read the comics.
And it was like that was put out like 05 or 06, but anyway, I just mentioned it because it kind of reminded me a little bit of that. See if there's anything else I want to ask you.
He can go on and on.
The last thing, yes, I can. The last thing I wanted to ask you real quick, getting away from the DC stuff, is how do you feel being a major Star Wars writer for novels about the decanonicization? Decanonicizing.
It's now Legends. The legendization.
Yes.
Of,
how do you feel about all that?
Well,
losing the expanded universe.
Just today, we're at Planet Comicon here in Kansas City, where there are 30,000 fans coming in. Just today, I've had like 4 people come up to my table, and they're like they're all wrecked up. But they can't do that. That's not right. How did they do that? And it's funny because it's connected right to the DC Comics stuff. Yeah. I said, look, I've worked enough in comics. We reboot Spider-Man all the time. We reboot Superman all the time. And to me, the best thing is that they have reissued them, but they're keeping them around. So you can still read the Star Wars books that I wrote, the Extended Universe books. And I mean, I've had my Young Jedi Knight series that I wrote with my wife, Rebecca Mesta. They're gone. They've taken them out of print, and you can't buy them anywhere. In fact, I think some of my Tales of the Jedi comics you can't buy anywhere. But mine, the Jedi Academy books, Darksaber, the Cantina books, everything else, they're keeping them around. They're just in a different universe.
Yeah.
And I'm cool with that.
Yeah, and clearly you don't mind that with this kind of stuff. I mean, when I first read Last Days of Krypton, when I saw that came out, I was fascinated that it wasn't an adaptation of source material. It was a complete reimagining. We very rarely see that. And then that it was as popular as it was. It's really cool.
Well, Paul Levis did like my Dune books, so.
Well, I'm glad he did.
I kind of had a sneak way to get in there, so.
Well, anyway, thanks a lot for talking to me.
Hey, it was fun.
I sure appreciate it. And
now I want to write more of these books. If they don't let me.
I want you to write more of these. Everybody, please read Last Days of Krypton and Enemies and Allies. And also, what's the most recent thing you got out?
Well, I have a series called Dan Shambles Zombie PI. So there are a whole series of really funny noir mysteries where he's a private detective and got killed, and he's back from the dead and back on the case, and he solves crimes with werewolves and ghosts and vampires, and those are really funny. I've got 4 of those novels out, and newest is it's called The Dark Between the Stars. It's the start of a trilogy in a gigantic science fiction epic. So if you like The Last Days of Krypton, it's an even bigger one.
Awesome. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. We sure appreciate it. I'm Captain Logan, and this was Kevin J. Anderson. We'll see you again very soon.
Thanks.